The testimony that convicted Adolf Eichmann of Holocaust atrocities more than half a century ago has lost none of its power to chill the heart.
What if the Nazis' final act of justice didn't go as planned, and instead turned into a grotesque nightmare? In Nuremberg, justice was supposed to be swift, precise, and final. But what if, in the end, it was anything but? This is the disturbing truth about what really happened when justice was supposed to be served. An unsettling look at the chaos behind the Nazi executions that history almost forgot. When World War II finally ended, the world turned its attention to the surviving architects of destruction. In the Palace of Justice at Nuremberg, 24 men were put on trial, charged with some of the worst crimes humanity had ever witnessed. They were accused of unleashing aggressive wars, committing atrocities, and masterminding the Holocaust. For a brief moment, the world seemed united, believing that justice would be swift and certain. Cameras flashed, reporters filled the press boxes, and every world inside that courtroom seemed to carry the weight of history. The courtroom itself became a symbol of what the Allies had fought for. Battered flags hung over the proceedings, a reminder that the victors were determined to show the world that such horrors would never be allowed to happen again. But behind the grand speeches and solemn promises, disagreements festered. Not everyone agreed on how to run the trials. Debates over evidence, verdicts, and punishments dragged on, and the political tensions began to seep into the very place meant to represent unity. Still, after nearly a year of testimony and arguments, the verdicts were reached. 12 men were sentenced to death. One of them, Martin Bormann, was missing, tried and condemned of absentia. That left 11 men waiting in their cells for the end. Among them were some of the most notorious figures of the Third Reich. Wilhelm Keitel, the obedient field marshal who had signed orders without question. Alfred Rosenberg, whose twisted theories helped build the racial hatred that fueled genocide. Hans Frank, the so-called Butcher of Poland, who had governed with terror. Julius Streicher, whose newspapers spewed relentless anti-Semitic propaganda. Fritz Sauckel, who rounded up millions in forced labor. Alfred Jodl, the strategist behind military campaigns soaked in blood. Arthur Seyss-Inquart, who had crushed the Netherlands under Nazi rule, and Ernst Kaltenbrunner, one of the last-ranking SS leaders left standing. Even if Hermann Göring, the once glittering face of Hitler's empire, sat among them. But Göring would never face the noose. Just hours before his execution, he managed to slip past justice once again, this time with a smuggled vial of cyanide. His death rocked the prison and embarrassed the Allies, leaving the guards and commanders scrambling for answers. How had one of the most closely watched prisoners in the world managed to slip through their fingers at the final hour? For the 10 men left behind, there would be no second chances. Their final walk was slow and heavy, through the dim halls of Nuremberg prison, leading to a converted gymnasium that looked nothing like a courtroom of justice. Here, 2 rough wooden gallows stood waiting. They weren't the carefully crafted execution devices one might expect for such a historic moment. They were crude, thrown together by men racing against the clock. Overseeing it was John C. Woods, a U.S. Army Master Sergeant who claimed to be an expert hangman. But behind his confident mask was a troubling truth. Woods had been discharged from the Navy for psychological issues and had lied about his background. During the war, he had botched multiple executions of American soldiers, leaving behind a trail of messy deaths. Yet somehow, no one questioned his fitness for the job now, when the eyes of the world were about to be watching. The first man to make the final climb was Joachim von Ribbentrop, once Hitler's polished foreign minister, now a shadow of his former self. He climbed the 14 steps with a shaky determination and mumbled a few words about hoping for peace. But there would be no dignified ending. When the trapdoor swung open beneath him, the miscalculated drop failed to snap his neck. Ribbentrop dangled at the end of the rope, twisting and kicking, his face darkening, his movements desperate. It took over 14 torturous minutes for his body to finally fall still. In the thick silence of the gymnasium, the sickening creak of the rope and the faint gurgling gasps echoed across the room. Next came Wilhelm Keitel, the iron-willed field marshal who had loyally rubber-stamped Hitler's most brutal orders. Despite everything, Keitel tried to face death like a soldier, standing straight and offering a final salute before the hood was placed over his head. But the noose was not his clean escape. Like Ribbentrop, Keitel suffered a botched hanging. The trapdoor betrayed him. The rope offered no mercy. And for 24 long minutes he struggled. His chest heaved under the hood, and the scraping of his boots against the wood was the only sign that he hadn't died instantly. Hidden behind the curtain that shielded the gallows, the gruesome reality was worse than anyone had prepared for. Third in line was Ernst Kaltenbrunner, towering and grim. As head of the Reich main security office, he had been at the center of the Nazi terror machine. He showed little emotion as he stepped forward, towering over the execution team. When the trapdoor was released, his body plunged hard, but the calculations still weren't right. Kaltenbrunner's massive frame jerked violently, the rope cutting deep into his neck. It took several minutes of spasming and twitching before he was finally pronounced dead. For witnesses, it was clear, once again, the execution had gone horribly wrong. Alfred Rosenberg followed. The man who had written the twisted philosophical backbone of Nazi ideology now walked slowly to the noose, saying nothing, showing no resistance. There was no final defiance, no last words. When the floor gave way beneath him, Rosenberg dropped hard. But even then, death did not come swiftly. His body swung awkwardly, and for several moments, they were faint, involuntary movements. Compared to the previous executions, it was slightly less chaotic, but is still a far cry from the quick, clinical justice that had been promised. Then came Hans Frank, whose name would be forever linked to the bloodshed in occupied Poland. Frank, once a bright young lawyer, had become one of the regime's most ruthless administrators. After his arrest, he clung to religion and expressed remorse, but few believed he truly repented. On the scaffold, Frank appeared strangely composed. As the noose tightened and the trapdoor opened, he dropped cleanly, but even with a better fall than some of the others, death did not claim him instantly. His body twitched for several minutes, the rope biting into his neck before he finally went still. Wilhelm Frick, Hitler's Minister of the Interior and later Governor of Bohemia and Moravia, was the next to face justice. He stumbled slightly as he climbed the steps, his final words, "Long live eternal Germany," echoing in the cold gymnasium. When the trapdoor opened, Frick's fall was clumsy, causing visible injury as he disappeared from view. Witnesses later described his end as one of the roughest of the night. Then came Julius Streicher, the infamous publisher of Der Stürmer, remained defiant until the last moment, shouting loudly before the noose was placed around his neck. Streicher resisted to the end, making the process far more chaotic than any that had come before. When the trapdoor opened, his final moments were prolonged, requiring intervention from the execution team to complete the sentence. Fritz Sauckel, architect of the Nazi forced labor system, followed. His last statements were passionate proclamations of innocence, but like others before him, the mechanics of the execution left him suspended longer than intended, a harsh reminder of the problems that plagued the entire operation. Alfred Jodl, the general who had signed many of Hitler's most notorious orders, faced his fate with quiet resolve. His drop was cleaner than most, but it still lacked the swiftness expected for such a solemn occasion. It took time before he was officially declared deceased. Arthur Seyss Inquart, the former Reich Commissioner of the Netherlands, was the last. He expressed a wish for peace in his final words. His descent was smoother, yet even he lingered longer than anticipated, reflecting the broader issues that had turned the executions into an uncomfortable affair. The entire night exposed serious flaws in preparation. The gallows were poorly constructed, with trapdoors too small to allow a quick fall. The ropes had not been properly measured for the prisoners' weights, and the executioner, John C. Woods, whose experience was questionable at best, seemed disturbingly indifferent to the misleadings. Afterward, he reportedly said, "I hanged those 10 Nazis, and I'm proud of it." But the Allies were determined to ensure that the story didn't end with the hangings. A secret operation was quickly put into motion to prevent any possibility of the men becoming martyrs. Each body was photographed, labeled, and placed into a simple coffin bearing a fake name. Even Hermann Göring, who had escaped the noose through suicide the night before, was included. On October 17, 1946, under heavy armed escort, the coffins were quietly transported to Munich's Ostfriedhof Cemetery. Cremations took place throughout the day, with soldiers guarding every entrance to prevent unwanted attention. An extra empty coffin had been added to the convoy to confuse any observers who might suspect the real mission. When the cremations were completed, the ashes were carefully gathered and transported to the Wensbach, a small tributary of the Isar River. There, without ceremony, the ashes were scattered into the flowing water. The empty urns were destroyed on the spot, leaving no physical trace behind. The goal was clear: no graves, no shrines, and no chance for future glorification. The condemned men's possessions were treated with the same thoroughness. Nazi insignia was removed from the uniforms before they were destroyed. Medals, awards, and personal decorations made of precious metals were defaced and turned over to the U.S. financial authorities, who sold them as scrap to help offset the costs of the trials. Some items, like Göring's famed Grand Cross and Blue Max, were deliberately damaged beyond repair. Only a few copies and personal items, looted from private collections or seized from his luxurious train, survived into modern times. Private letters, diaries, and documents were also collected. Some were archived for historical records, while others disappeared mysteriously, either misplaced or quietly taken as unofficial souvenirs. Pieces of history, both valuable and damning, slipped into the shadows. As for John C. Woods, his unusual career ended only a few years later. In 1950, when stationed in the Pacific at Eniwetok Atoll, he died during a work accident involving electrical equipment. Officially ruled a mishap, his passing added one last strange footnote to the legacy of the Nuremberg executions. Justice had been served, but not with the order and dignity the world had expected. Instead, the final chapter of the Nazi leadership closed in a way that mirrored the chaos and cruelty they had once unleashed, a messy, unsettling exclusion to one of history's darkest eras. So, in the end, the executions at Nuremberg were more than just a reckoning. They were a reminder that even justice can be messy and imperfect. If you're interested in more fascinating history content, make sure to click on the next video.